Thank you very much. Because this story of the kidnapping of Patty Hearst has so many different iterations and spans half a century, I'd like to just kick off this talk with a attempt by the publisher of the book, who also happens to be a graphic designer, to show the complexity of the cover. You know, they like to say you can't judge a book by the cover, but in this case, I think you might be able to. So let's see if we can show this. See if I can do this. Here we go. This brief introduction. Here we go.
Searching for Patty Hearst by Roger Rapoport. A cover story. When we first started to think of what we wanted for the cover for Roger's book, Searching for Patty Hearst, I went through all the images. Her being arrested, robbing the bank, the one with the gun, happy Patty before, pictures with Steve Weed, her fiancé, thanks Getty, and then the trial. And these images are so burned into our consciousness that there's nothing new to see anymore. There's no new meaning to be had. We have these 7 or 8 fixed expressions, and we don't learn anything about Patty from them. So I decided I had to go in a brand new direction. And so I decided I had to turn to AI. I started off with some very simple prompts. Patty Hearst as a Roman goddess in San Simeon. Then saw what they would do if I added Willie Wolfe and Steve Weed. And I started to see the kind of fun you could have with it. Some of the images didn't look anything like Patty. Some of them did. And as I disappeared deeper down into the rabbit hole, I tried the different styles of painters. Titian, the Venus de Milo, the birth of Venus. That gave up some really peculiar ideas. And the different ages it picked for Willie Wolfe and Steve Weed didn't seem to have much relation to what I'd put in. Then I got into the sort of romance genre. This, for a while, seemed to be quite productive. This was going to be one of the covers. Then I decided that wasn't the story. I needed to get back to Patty. I don't know who those 2 women were. Then we get into the kind of Bond movie poster. This is what the prompt I put in here. Then I realized, back to the action heroes, that we were searching for Patty, for who Patty was. And then the idea came for a prompt of the photo wall. Searching for Patty. And that brought us to this. And as soon as I saw this, the earrings that had plucked from somewhere, the newsprint, the idea that so much is about the media, about her and the media, over the years, we're searching for Patty Hearst. We're searching for the meaning today of what that meant. One strange little thing, one quirk about AI. We're about to go to press, and I wonder, what colour are Patty's eyes? Turns out they're brown, not what AI thought, which was blue. A couple of minutes in Photoshop, and they're brown. And so we ended up with this 1970s era iconic image of Patricia Hearst. As an actor and a designer, I am kind of worried about where this all goes. But for now, for this, it seemed the perfect solution. A novel about Patty Hearst, a fictional cover of a fictional Patty, composited from 50 years of images, out there in Hearst newspapers and Hearst TV shows and Hearst webcasts. 50 years with this eternally slippery story that has evaded everyone's grasp. And the unreliable narrator, AI, is just acting on vast data and prompts that I give it. It doesn't know what it's creating. It's doing what it's told. Maybe AI kidnapped me. Maybe I'm beginning to fall in love with my captor. And maybe this cover is the first example of AI syndrome. Enjoy the book.
See if I can get up here. Great. Okay. So do I need to expand the, let's see here. I don't know, but I just want to, is the full screen over here?
We'll just go to play from the start right up here.
Just go here?
Right up here. Yep.
There it is, okay. So Patty Hearst, at the beginning of the story, was 19 years old, a student at the University of Michigan, I'm sorry, University of California, Berkeley. She, at that point, when the story begins, in 1973, she had fallen in love with her high school math teacher at Crystal Springs School for Girls in Hillsborough, where she lived with her family, one of the wealthiest media families in America, probably best known as a protagonist of Citizen Kane, William Randolph Hearst, her grandfather. And she moved to Berkeley with her fiancé, Steve Weed, who was a philosophy student, and she was an art major. And while they were living in Berkeley, there was a series of political events going on that led to the birth of an organization called the Symbionese Liberation Army. Many people have asked, what is the word Symbionese? What is the significance of that word? There is none. They just picked it out of thin air. It was formed by a group of students who worked with a escaped convict named Donald DeFries, who they had met when they were working for a prison rights group, both at Soledad Prison, south of San Francisco, and at Vacaville, which is closer to Sacramento. After he escaped in a laundry cart, he connected with some of these young people, mostly Berkeley students, and they formed this political organization called the Symbionese Liberation Army. DeFries, who took the name of Field Marshal Sing Q, was the only black member of the SLA, and he felt that he could basically start a revolution. They decided that they needed a place to live, and Nancy Lynn Perry, one of the students, rented a safe house for them just east of San Francisco and Concord. The decision to get some notoriety began when they decided to target a much-loved black superintendent of the Oakland schools, Marcus Foster, who was murdered by them, and his deputy, Bob Blackburn, who's shown here, was very, very badly injured. The moment this happened, the left, including the Weathermen, completely disowned this group. They didn't know anything about it. There was even a theory that they were CIA agent provocateurs, and they were denounced by all sides of the leftist movement, especially the anti-war movement. In '74, after the beginning, in January, two of the members were arrested for the murder of Foster. They went to San Quentin, and what happened was that the police captured a lot of documents from the house. The SLA immediately went into hiding, and she had tried to burn the house down and failed, as you can see. So a lot of the information was now in the hands of police, and they even had the hit list. And on the hit list, among others, was the head of the California Department of Corrections, Raymond Pecunier. So they were reaching very high. On February 4th, they took a turn and decided to kidnap Patricia Hearst, who they discovered when her wedding announcement was published in her father's newspaper, and they thought she'd be a good target for a couple of reasons. One is they felt they'd get a lot of coverage, and the other is they thought they'd get a lot of money. Steve Weed, her fiance, was badly beaten in this attack, but was not captured. At this point, they needed a safe house. They moved across the bay just south of San Francisco to Daly City, where Patty was held captive for 6 months, 6 weeks. There were, at that point, Patty and her captors, there were 9 people living in this 1,200 square foot house for a 6-week period. And this was a time when the SLA thought it would be an easy hit. They asked for $4 million from her father, one of the wealthiest publishers in the world. And effectively what happened was the Hearst decided that paying the ransom would only inspire more kidnappings and more violence. So they compromised on a free food program that took place in Oakland, which kind of turned into a riot. So effectively, they wanted $70 worth of groceries for every poor person in California. And the Hearst did come up with over $1 million for that, but they never paid a direct ransom for Patty. So after all this happened, Patty basically had a choice to make. The SLA had decided that she was becoming a liability because now, of course, there was tremendous attention, and the FBI had brought in, a huge field task force to try to find her. So they offered her freedom, and she decided that she really didn't want to go because she was afraid that if she did try to turn herself in, it could be incredibly dangerous because there were so many agents out looking for her. So she announced on April the 3rd, that she decided to stay with the SLA and fight. And in a public communique that was page 1 in her father's paper and obviously all over the country, her father's television stations, that she decided to stay and fight with the SLA, and they'd given her a gun to defend herself. There was a lot of skepticism that she'd been basically forced to do this at gunpoint. So Patty decided to take matters into her own hands, and on April 15th, she participated on camera in a bank robbery on the security camera, wielding a shotgun, announced that her new name was Tanya. They walked off with $10,000. And an interesting footnote, the bank was owned by the father of one of her closest friends, Trish Tobin. So that came as a bit of a shock. At that point, she immediately went from being a much loved, much worried about, people were praying, sending money to the family for the ransom and so on, to suddenly becoming a public enemy. And if you saw the poster outside, there was a line of posters in every post office in America. She was now a suspect. This is the poster, and at this point, there were still 6 members of the SLA and the Harrises, 6 other members, who were holding her captive. One of them was Willie Wolfe, and he was kind of became her closest friend in the group. And while she was busy denouncing her family and saying publicly things like, one thing I've learned is that the corporate ruling class will do anything in their power in order to maintain their position of control over the masses, even if this means sacrificing one of their own. So it was a little late to try to ransom her. She figured that the family just simply didn't want to pay the $4 million. And the family had been advised by the governor, the attorney general, and a lot of hostage consultants that if they did pay the ransom, it would merely be leading to more kidnappings, bombings, and so forth. So they held the line at that. She announced that she was spurning her fiancé, Steve Weed. They were going to get married in June, and she'd fallen in love with one of the kidnappers, Willie Wolfe. His name was Cujo, and they fled to Los Angeles after spending a little more time in this hideout in San Francisco. And the FBI did find this one about 2 days after they left. So on May 16th, they went shopping because they decided they were going to leave Los Angeles. Things were way too hot there, and they were going to go to Colorado. So they went to a sporting goods store. So the Harrises, Bill was second in command, and his wife, Emily, went to a sporting goods store in Inglewood, and Bill was tackled for shoplifting. Patty was hiding in the back of a van. She stood up, she had 2 rifles, fired 27 shots, and helped Bill run to safety. And they fled in this van, which was hot, so they immediately abandoned it and carjacked another vehicle. the vehicle that they carjacked was owned by this guy, Tom Matthews, and he basically went for a ride with them in the vehicle that they claimed that they were looking to buy, but actually were looking to steal. And so Tom ended up having a whole night with the Harrises. By the time they got to their hideout in Anaheim, across the street from Disneyland, the SLA was on television. Bill Harris had made a mistake. He had left a parking ticket on the windshield of that van, the one that they abandoned, and that led to the hideout of the other 6 members, who immediately were surrounded by the LAPD. In the largest firefight on American soil ever, 9,000 rounds were fired. 6 of the SLA members, including Willie Wolfe, Donald DeFreeze, and 4 of the women who were in the group, died. At that point, they realized that the opportunity to surrender was becoming much more limited because they were afraid the same thing could happen to them, and that's when they went on the run. Here's Willie Wolfe's tombstone. They did a communique memorializing their fallen members, and Patty did a very, very eloquent eulogy for the 6 fallen comrades, including her lover, Willie Wolfe. They headed for Pennsylvania, a farm there, and that's where they hid out for the summer. Jack Scott, a political activist, and his wife, Mickey Scott, drove and posed. Jack posed as Patty's husband in an escape, and his parents drove the car. They posed as the in-laws, and they got her to Pennsylvania, where she hid out for the summer. And also, they were looking at moving to a farm in New York as well. By 1975, any opportunity for a ransom had completely collapsed. Patty's father had given up hope on that. And they decided in the spring of '75 to go back to bank robbing. It got a little more difficult. The first one went well, in Sacramento, but the second one in Carmichael, an innocent customer who was actually turning in a church collection was accidentally shot. And at that point, now they were wanted for attempted murder on top of the bank robbery. Meanwhile, the trial of Little Ramiro was going on. They were in San Quentin, and they were convicted for the murder of Marcus Foster. Patty was finally caught in San Francisco in September of 1975, and the Harrises were caught the same day. They were hiding out nearby. She was hiding out with Wendy Yoshimura, who had been basically the person that had driven her back to California and had been involved in keeping her anonymous, basically. So the Harrises went to another jail. There were 2 trials going on now, and Patty got 7 years. The Harrises were also sentenced at a separate trial, and she went to a jail in Pleasanton and became the first kidnapping victim ever to be tried and convicted and jailed for bank robbery. The Harrises here were sentenced for a longer sentence, 8 years, and they actually served 5 for kidnapping, not for bank robbery, because they weren't on the cameras during the bank robbery. So nobody, basically they decided to just convict them for kidnapping and let the bank robbery go. Patty's sentence was commuted in February 1979. The Committee to Free Patty Hearst convinced President Carter to commute her sentence, and she went on to do a book and a movie about her case, and in his last official act as president, on the same day he pardoned his brother, Bill Clinton pardoned Patty, and that was it. Patty has had a very successful career as an author. She's also won a lot of dog shows. She's a philanthropist. She's been involved in the Me Too movement. One of her daughters is also a successful actress. She played Abigail Folger in a movie about the Manson murders. She has grandchildren. She lives in New York and in Charleston, South Carolina. And she's considered to be one of the wealthiest women in America. And that's largely because her father left an estate of $1.5 billion. The father who didn't ransom her. I want to talk to you a little bit about my book because I covered this case. In fact, not only did I cover it, I lived with her fiancé, Steve Weed, after she was kidnapped, because we wrote a book together for Valentine, the New York publisher. So Steve had the inn. He had her bank account. He had a lot of her personal records. He had everything a publisher could ever want. When the book was done, he walked into my place. He'd been staying in a back unit in behind my house, and announced that he wasn't happy with the book. It was a little too forthcoming. He didn't like me putting in stuff like, their relationship when he was her high school teacher. He didn't like the fact that he quoted her saying that her mother had taken her to Atlanta on a roots tour and was using the N-word a lot. There were just a lot of little things that were really, really getting to him. And he didn't like being portrayed as a drug dealer, which he was. He was a drug dealer at Princeton. The line was, "Get your weed from weed." And he just sort of felt, he felt the book made him look like a predator, he wasn't really happy with it. So he fired me and wrote his own book. So my book, the one the 280-page manuscript, just kind of sat there. And then I covered the story for New Times, some other magazines. This particular article was part of the trial when he tried to sue me for $450,000. We settled, and he ended up paying me off for the book. But more to the point, much more important than Steve, after he got out of jail, Bill Harris gave me an interview for the Oakland Tribune, a 3-part interview talking about the inside story of the SLA, and I published that in it would have been, hold on, get this right, 1988. Bill Harris came to one of my talks in San Francisco a few months ago, and I subsequently did another interview with him, which I published. So I've had an opportunity to get to know him a little better and find out more. He actually ended up being a private investigator for a law firm, and one of the husband of the lawyer who was his boss showed up at one of my events and saw Bill, and walked up and introduced, said, "Bill," it was reunion time, and it turned out that Bill had been their babysitter for their children, for this lawyer, and his husband had been their babysitter. We also had another event very close to San Simeon. My wife was talking to a guy at the hotel where we were staying, and she explained about the book. It turned out that he worked as the blacksmith at the Hearst Ranch, and it turned out that Patty had hid out when this whole FBI field force, hundreds and hundreds of agents were combing California. She was hiding out in a cottage on the Hearst Ranch. So I've had quite a few people come up at these various events to talk about it. So the big question, the big unanswered question that everybody still deliberates and wants to know more about is, well, was she actually brainwashed, victim of the Stockholm Syndrome or whatever interpretation you want to put on it, or did she make a free will decision to join the SLA primarily because her father didn't ransom her and she was in a situation where she was afraid she'd end up like the 6 SLA members who got shot? Or would she end up, if she tried to turn herself in, could a trigger-happy cop maybe make a mistake or something like that? It's a good question. And the book, which actually begins here in Michigan and ends in Michigan, is my attempt as an investigative reporter to let every single person that you've just heard about literally have their side, tell their side of the story. So chapter by chapter, and that's everybody involved in the case that we just mentioned and seen on the screen gets their time to tell what they think really happened, the true story. Now we're talking about Patty's sister, her cousin, the cops, the lawyers, the prosecutor, everybody that possibly could have a point of view on this case. And then it's up to the reader to decide, okay, was she really a guilty bank robber, or was she really framed because they forced her into this, and so on. So when you read all the other books about this, particularly Patty's book, but there are many, many other points of view. There's even one book out, it might be in the library, that even says that Patty was having a love affair with Donald DeFreeze, She was part of this prison group, And then there's other books that point out she walked across United Farm Worker picket lines and was the farthest thing from a Berkeley radical you could ever imagine, which is what Steve told me. Now remember, I spent 4 months living with the person who was closest to her, telling me exactly what happened, the true story of their life together. And then he walked into, this is on Thanksgiving weekend, walked into my office and said, well, yeah, it's kind of true, but I don't really want to tell the truth. You know, I don't want to embarrass people. I don't want her family to be mad at me and all this kind of stuff. So even this guy who, you know, been her fiance, now there were some questions being raised about, well, how much of what he told me was actually true. He wouldn't let me interview any of the Hearst family members. By the way, I write for a number of Hearst publications, and the company, the right-wing Hearst, San Simeon, you know, Citizen Kane, Hearst, there's been an evolution in the company. If you read the San Francisco Chronicle today, and I do, I think you'd be surprised by how left that paper is. It's pretty left. So the company has gone through, you know, quite an evolution. It's certainly not her grandfather's newspaper. So as far as the book goes, it's been a very interesting experience because about half my audiences don't know who Patty, they didn't live through it. But for people who did live through it, this story, which was on the cover of Newsweek 7 times and was leading the national news, actually knocked the Watergate scandal off the front page. That's how big it was, because of the whole mystery about, you know, where was she for a year and a half, and then did she really rob a bank? And my own personal feeling is, no matter how you look at her side of the story, it's totally credible to believe that she was really mad at her wealthy family for not ransoming her. But it's also true that under those circumstances, she would definitely be malleable because the family that had taken such great care of her whole life, she never had to worry about anything, suddenly wasn't available to her. So clearly, that made her more open to persuasion by her kidnappers. So it's just a fascinating story. I'd be happy to answer questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, Roger. Did you ever attempt to interview, like in recent times, Patty Hearst?
Oh, yes, of course.
And what did she say?
I did, yes. Well, she gave a lot of interviews all over the place when her movie came out, which, by the way, didn't do very well. Natasha Richardson played Patty. Tons of interviews. Larry King all over the place. There wasn't anybody she didn't interview with. And that was it. As soon as that publicity campaign ended for her book and her movie, she's not given any interviews at all. However, she has issued press releases, and one of them is about the estate. And very simply explained, she and her cousin Will, who's been the publisher himself, decided that they were going to issue a press release attacking the estate, because if anybody tries to sue the estate to change the codicil, which basically says nobody gets the money until all the heirs, all the grandchildren have died, then control of the company will go back to the family, okay? Well, in that clause, there was also a clause that said, if anybody sues to try to break that clause, they're immediately disinherited. So Patty put out a press release about that, attacking that. So she does show up rarely. Go ahead. Who else? Okay. Yeah.
So, trying to get a vision for the book, which is it sort of a I can't pronounce
Yeah.
it, Rashomon type of the different views of the same event?
Yeah.
The different participants?
Rashomon is a good example. There's a better one that I like even better. Rashomon is an incredible movie. But the one I like the best is a movie called Vantage Point, where they literally do the same thing that you just said. Everybody involved in this killing gets to see the event from their side. And when you think about it, when you think about Steve Wiebe, that's a good example, and Bill Harris, who are polar opposites, obviously. If you listen to Bill and his side of the story, well, we told her 3 weeks after, you're too hot, you can go. And she said to us, no, they might kill me, They couldn't get rid of her. The ransom of Red Chief. Well, who do you believe? It gets really tricky. Go ahead, Martin. Yeah.
Hi,
Hi, Martin.
it's David.
Oh, it's David, I'm sorry. I got it wrong.
This book is kind of advertised as fiction. How much of it is fiction and how much of it is nonfiction?
Well, David, the answer is that there are some things in the book that actually did happen. I really did live with Steve Weed for 4 months. I really did interview Bill Harris, okay? I really did come from Michigan and work at the Michigan Daily, which is in the book. So those things are pretty apparent. Then there's things that actually happened, like there really was a bank robbery. 6 members of the SLA really did die. So if you do the timeline of the case, it's pretty clear that the events happened. Where it's fictionalized is the people who are dead, who can't speak for themselves, who have an opportunity in this book literally to tell their side of the story, although obviously I don't have their memoir because they didn't write one. And so that's where the balance is. But I just want to say this about fiction versus truth. If you talked, for example, today to Bill Harris, as I have, I think you would walk away saying to yourself, well, this guy's got a photographic memory. He remembers everything that happened. And then there's all these people that totally disagree with him. And that's the problem that every prosecutor, every defense attorney deals with. Who's telling the best story? And I guess that's why we're in the library, right? Is to basically read all the different accounts and decide who's actually telling the truth. But I will tell you one thing that is incontrovertible proof. And you can read Jeffrey Toobin's book or any of the other books. Steve Weed, when she was kidnapped, actually jumped the fence behind the house and ran, okay? There's no question that happened. It's fully documented. I know it's true because he told me, and everybody else who was there, the eyewitnesses saw it. So there's some things that, trust me, okay? For sure, they really did happen.
The recently departed basketball player Bill Walton had a connection with several of the people in this story.
Well, yes, Jack Scott was his mentor, like his mentor.
Yeah. Did you have an opportunity to talk to Bill before he passed?
You're talking about,
Bill Walton.
I actually did interview him, but not for this. I've actually wrote a whole article about him, but not, it was for a sports magazine, not about this subject, no. Anybody else? Go ahead.
What's Steve doing now?
Oh, good question. Steve Weed is now a realtor in Menlo Park, California, and he's been one for quite a while. By the way, there was a CNN documentary about 8 years ago when Jeffrey Toobin's book came out. Some of you might want to look at it. Steve is interviewed in that documentary, so you can have a chance to get his, his side. Okay. Go ahead.
What kind of conclusions did you wind up drawing about Patty and what you believe she really felt after doing all this research?
Okay, well, here's one thing I do believe about, and this answers your question and also your question. She wrote incredibly articulate statements that were broadsides basically attacking the Hearst company, not just because of her, but because of all sorts of things, and about the revolution and the Vietnam War and so on. And I know this is true. There's no question that she wrote them. The question is, did she write them or did somebody else write them for her? And first of all the coverage, and I think I'm a little guilty of this too, everybody who's written about this, I think, never gives her credit for how brilliant a woman she was. She was terrible in the trial. I'll go to that in a second. But she was and is a brilliant woman. What she wrote was better than anything the SLA members. She really knew what she was talking about, because guess what? She's writing from the inside. She's part of a family that's one of the wealthiest families in America. So she doesn't have to think about, the aristocracy. She's part of it, right? And the irony is that when she turned in these statements, these communiques that were published on the front page of her father's newspaper as news, they actually tried to talk her into toning them down because they felt they were so beautifully written that nobody would believe that a 19-year-old sophomore, an art student at Michigan, could possibly write that well. And they tried to talk her into toning them down. I just find that utterly fascinating about her. So my feeling about her is, above all, whether or not anybody, I mean a minority of one, I think her number one priority was not dying. And after those 6 people died in that firefight, which was televised live nationally, if you can imagine, I think she felt she was incredibly vulnerable. And that's why she didn't turn herself in. It's as simple as that. Do I think she wanted to rob that bank, that they held a gun to her head to make her do it, to go on camera to make her look at it? Again, after she decided not to turn herself in, I think she was trying to bolster their image for self-preservation. I think that's what it was about, you know. That if they came after the SLA, they were gonna shoot. And remember, we know for a fact that when her friend, she could have just taken that van, she was lying in the back with an M1 and another semi-automatic. She could have just gotten in the driver's seat and driven to a police station, right? Okay? Well, instead, she fires off, 40 rounds and Bill Harris comes running back with Emily to the car. She didn't have to do that, okay? I don't consider that to be Stockholm Syndrome or brainwashing. I think she was trying not to get killed. That's really what was going on, and she thought her chances were better running with them than going to the police station. You know,
I just thought of something. She could have gone to any snooty private university or college.
right.
At the time, as we all well know, the University of California at Berkeley
Right.
had a
Yeah,
well-earned radical reputation. Why did she, was that an act of
well,
rebellion on her
actually,
part?
she could have
going
gone
there?
she could have gone to Stanford.
Uh-huh.
And she didn't, and the reason was that Steve, her fiancé, was a philosophy graduate student at Cal, and she was gonna marry him. And there's one other thing, she didn't go back to Steve after she got out. In fact, she's never talked to him again. They've never spoken since then. Things were going very badly, and she was having a lot of anxiety. So she's got a father who didn't ransom her. Steve was making a lot of statements that she hated. Basically, Steve was saying, she's not a very bright girl. She's not dumb, but she's not very bright. She's a nice girl, and she just hated that. If you read her book, she talks about Steve was basically putting her down. Well, he did that the whole time they were having the affair. It was always his friends, not her friends. So that was another factor. So she was a little upset with her father for not ransoming her, and she was very upset with Steve for going on, national television. She's not the brightest, but, I'm praying for her. It was just crazy stuff, She was angry about that. Go ahead, David.
Besides being wealthy and a grandmother, is she involved in any political or any other type of activities at this point?
She's been involved in the Me Too movement, quite articulately, and she has issued statements about the kidnapping, referencing that as part of the experience that she had. She hasn't done a lot of stuff publicly, but I know that she's been a philanthropist. The only question is, where did the money go? And I'm not sure, but I'm assuming it's going to a lot of good causes. Obviously, she's a dog lover, and she wins these major dog shows, so that's part of her life. It's a big deal for her. And I've talked to a lot of people who've run into her in various places. I mean, she's out there, traveling around.
How old is she now?
She's 70. Okay. Well, you've been a great audience. I've got some books. Thank you. I really appreciate your coming, and it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.